She was sold beneath the cottonwood trees, on land that once belonged to her people. A man with tobacco-stained fingers handed off a strip of torn muslin as payment, then spat to the side like he was rid of something foul. "Too wild for housework," he said. "Won't take to speak in English. Best use her for land labor or let her be your problem." The trader nodded, pulled her roughly by the wrist, and loaded her onto the wagon without a name, a home, or a word said. She didn't cry. Lakota blood didn't spill for strangers. Her name had once meant willow in the storm, but now none cared to know it. She was 19 winters and a shadow of herself. The dress they forced on her was stiff and grey, frayed at the hem. Her braids had been hacked short, uneven like brush left to rot. Still, her eyes held the old fire, not anger, just the knowing that comes from watching too much. By the time they reached the outpost in West Gannett, the trader had tired of her silence and pushed her toward a hitching post. "Gonna leave her here till someone's desperate enough," he muttered, more to himself than the crowd. The post was close to the stock pens, where the smell of manure and blood soaked the dirt. Folks passed, stared, then moved on. She stood there for hours, eyes on the distant hills, jaw tight, wrists red from the rope. The sun moved overhead like a hunter tracking prey. Children threw rocks. A woman crossed herself and whispered a prayer. None touched her. When the stranger came, no one noticed. He rode a dun horse with cracked hooves and wore a coat too heavy for the season. Dust clung to him, and something in his gaze distant, like he was never quite in the moment. He didn't look at her right away. He looked at the rope first, then at her hands, then finally into her eyes. "What's her price?" he asked the trader. "She don't speak. Don't cook neither. Called her too wild, $5 or a sack of oats, whatever comes first." The man reached into his coat, pulled out a tin box, and handed over what looked like the last silver he had. "She's not a horse," he said, and untied the rope himself. She didn't flinch, didn't thank him, just followed. They rode without talking. The horse's hooves kicked dust into the dying sun, and the wind smelled of cedar and dry grass. He didn't touch her, didn't ask questions, just pointed west toward the hills that grew darker by the hour. By the time they reached the ranch, it was almost night. It wasn't much, 2 sheds, a barn leaning to one side, and a house with a broken window patched with canvas. But it was land, the kind that fights back but remembers your name if you stay long enough. He slid off the horse and nodded toward the porch. "Ain't got beds. You can take the barn till I fix one." She walked ahead without waiting. The hay smelled like mice and cold. Still, it was the first roof she'd chosen for herself since the soldiers came. From the house, the man lit a lantern, its glow soft against the dark. He didn't say good night. She didn't say thank you. But something settled in the air, not comfort, just a truce. And in the silence of that prairie night, under stars too stubborn to hide, she whispered her name for the first time in years. Wichapi Hota, Gray Star. And she wasn't sold anymore. She rose before the rooster's cry, long before the sky softened. The barn was cold, the kind of cold that seeped through hay and bone, but she didn't shiver. Gray Star had known colder things than night. Barefoot, she stepped into the yard. The earth was dry and cracked beneath her soles, and the wind carried the dust of broken seasons. Out there, nothing belonged to anyone, not really, but everything remembered where it came from, just like her. She moved like someone who didn't want to be seen, even if no one was watching. In the kitchen, he poured water from a kettle into a cracked enamel basin. When she entered, he stepped back, not from fear, but from the habit of giving space to someone who needed it. He didn't look up when he spoke. "Water's warm, take what you need." She didn't answer. Instead, she dipped her hands into the basin and washed in silence, as if the ritual might erase the memory of ropes, of auctions, of the eyes that weighed her like cattle. He watched without meaning to. Not her body, her hands. They moved like they remembered another life, weaving, skinning, holding children perhaps, but now they scrubbed without purpose, as though scrubbing could bring something back. Later that morning, he gave her a shovel and pointed toward a patch of wild brush near the corral. "Clear it if you can. You don't have to. But if you're staying, it's yours." She didn't ask whose land it was before. She already knew. As she worked, sweat gathered along her hairline. Dirt stuck to her forearms, and thorns bit into her palms. She bled, quietly. The kind of blood that doesn't seek attention. By midday, she had cleared the patch clean. Not for him, not for thanks. Just to feel the ache of doing something no one could take. From a distance, he watched her, not like the traders did. His eyes didn't claim. They questioned. She didn't eat with him the first day. Took her food to the barn and ate facing the hills. He didn't stop her, just left a blanket on the porch without a word. At night, she sat near the horses, whispering in Lakhotiyapi. Her tongue tasted old syllables once forbidden. She spoke to the wind, to the moon, to the spirits of those who walked before her. She wasn't praying, she was remembering. On the third morning, the postman came by. He didn't get off his horse. "That the one from Gannet?" he asked, chin jerking toward her. Heard they sold her for being wild. The rancher didn't reply. Just stared at him until the man adjusted in his saddle. "Folks talk. Say it ain't proper, bringing her here. You best keep to yourself. Ain't safe otherwise." Grey Star stood at the barn door watching. She heard every word but made no sound. She didn't need to. She'd lived a lifetime on the edges of speech. The postman left with dust on his coat and a nervous pull on the reins. That night, he brought her a new pair of boots. Set them by the barn without speaking. She stared at them a long time. Then at him. Not with gratitude, but with confusion. As if she didn't know what kindness looked like anymore. He shrugged. "Snow's comin'. Can't have you barefoot." She didn't smile. But she took the boots. Later, inside the barn, she placed them beside her bed of hay. Not neatly, carefully, as if they were sacred. And in the silence, something shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. He never asked her name. Not out of rudeness, he just didn't believe names meant much when the world already called you other things. Names like half-blood, stray, or widower. He'd once had a wife, Clara. She died in the spring floods 2 years back, swallowed by a river swollen with snowmelt and sorrow. The water had taken her quietly, almost kindly, leaving no trace but the way he walked ever since, as if part of him never came back to shore. Grey Star didn't know that. Not fully, but she felt it. It lived in how he carried a tin locket in his breast pocket but never opened it, in how he lingered beside the horses longer than needed, in the way he never entered the barn uninvited, though it was his. Their silences began to mirror each other. She would carry wood to the porch. He would sharpen her tools and leave them by the barn door. Neither said thank you. Neither needed to. On the 7th night, a storm came. Not rain, but a windstorm that rattled the windows and howled like old spirits. She didn't sleep. Instead, she wrapped herself in the blanket he'd given and watched the rafters creak overhead. At some point, he opened the barn door and stood in the frame. He didn't step inside, just looked at her, coat whipping around him. "You all right?" She nodded, slowly, but her eyes said otherwise. He left. Returned minutes later with a lantern and a tin of coffee. "Storm's louder than it is dangerous, but I don't sleep through wind either." He sat near the haystack, not close, just near enough to share the silence. She didn't speak. He didn't expect her to. Instead, she reached for the tin and took a sip. The warmth surprised her. "You married?" she asked suddenly. Her voice was soft but unflinching. "Was," he said, eyes fixed on the lantern's flicker. "Children?" "No." "Couldn't." She nodded. That was enough. She didn't ask more. He didn't offer more. But they stayed that way until the wind died down and the lantern burned low. The next day, something changed. He showed her how to saddle the older mare, not like someone instructing, but like someone offering trust. "She'll buck if you tighten the cinch too quick," he said, stroking the horse's neck. "But she don't mean it. Just scared easy." Grey Star ran her hand along the mare's mane. "Like people," she said quietly. He didn't answer, but something in his jaw softened. Later, she rode alone to the far pasture, her braid loose in the wind. He watched from the porch, pipe between his fingers, not lit, just held. That night, she cooked for the first time, a stew from dried meat and root vegetables. He sat at the table and waited until she sat too. No blessing, no toasts, just two people eating in silence, the clink of spoon against tin the only sound. After, she lingered in the doorway. The wind had calmed. The stars burned low, quiet as breath. She looked at him, this man who spoke little, but saw too much. "You don't look at me like they did," she said. He set down his cup. "I ain't them." She nodded once, then stepped into the dark, boots quiet on the earth. He watched her disappear toward the barn, not knowing why he suddenly felt less like a man haunted and more like one finally waking. And the ranch, for the first time in years, didn't feel empty. It felt like something beginning. The mornings came softer after that, not warmer. The wind still bit at the skin and the earth still cracked with frost, but something in the air no longer pushed her away. The silence of the land, once sharp and unkind, now echoed with the rhythm of routine, of two souls learning the steps of a quiet dance neither had asked for. He rose early, always had, not for chores, though there were many, but because sleep held no kindness for him. Dreams came heavy, full of water and absence. So he worked. She joined him without words, not by duty, but by instinct. Together they mended fences, her hands nimble, his steady. They repaired the barn roof, side by side under a pale sun, her braid blowing loose in the wind, his brow furrowed not in frustration, but focus. They spoke only when needed, nails crooked, ladders loose. But the space between those words grew softer. The silence began to say more than voices ever could. One morning she found the bird. It lay beneath the cedar by the well, a crow, wing bent and trembling. Its feathers were dull, matted with dirt, but its eyes were sharp, defiant. She knelt beside it, speaking low in Lakota-Yapi. "Wanietu tokeliayesa, even in winter you don't give in." She gathered it in a worn shawl and brought it to the barn. He watched her pass with it pressed to her chest, something sacred in her steps. She said nothing to him, didn't need to. By evening she'd built it a small nest near the stove with straw and scraps of cloth. She fed it bits of corn and warm milk, her hands gentle but firm. He came to the door and leaned on the frame. "You fixing to keep it?" She didn't turn. No one else would. He nodded, understood that. For days she tended to it. She spoke to the bird in Lakota, sang low songs with no beginning or end. The crow never stopped watching her, not even when it slept. He began leaving things for it, a strip of meat, a bowl of water, not for the bird, for her. In time the crow healed, not fully. Its wing still hung low, but it stood taller. Its feathers began to shine again. And one morning, as the mist rose over the field, it flew just a few feet, then more, until it disappeared into the trees behind the pasture. She watched it go without smiling, but her eyes glistened. He came to her side, wiping his hands on his trousers. "You gave it back its sky." She shook her head. "It never lost it, just forgot." They stood together, shoulders nearly touching. Later that week, a light snow fell, the kind that didn't stick, but whispered of what was coming. She found him in the shed, carving a piece of pine into something shapeless. She sat across from him. "You always fix things with your hands?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Only things that don't scream when they break." She leaned back, the scent of pine filling the room. "That why you fixed the fence before the roof?" He smiled, the first time she saw it. Not wide, just enough to soften the corners of his eyes. "Roof can wait. Fences keep things out. Or in." She nodded slowly. "Depends what you're afraid of." He didn't answer, just kept carving. That night she left the barn door open. Not wide, just enough for the wind to come through, gentle and cold. In the house he lit 2 candles instead of one on the table, one on the window. Neither of them said what it meant. But when she entered and sat across from him, and he passed her a bowl without a word, it was clear. They were no longer strangers. Not yet a family, not yet whole. But something was being built, not with hammers or nails, but with mornings shared and things unspoken. And outside in the frozen dusk, a crow called once, then was silent. The land began to thaw. It came slowly, a shift in the wind, the way the mud clung to boots, the distant crack of river ice loosening its grip. But with it came more than just spring. With it came eyes. Men had always watched land like this, not for its beauty, but for its yield. Not for its stories, but for what they could bury beneath them. He noticed first the fresh tracks near the edge of the property, the broken twig too clean to be from a coyote. A horse had passed through, heavy-hooved, rider tall, the kind that didn't visit for coffee. She felt it too. The crows had gone silent one morning, not calling at dawn. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, on a Thursday, he came. Rider in a black coat, horse slick with sweat. He carried a rifle slung lazy across his back, but his eyes did the real shooting. She was feeding the chickens when she saw him approach. Her breath caught, not from fear, not exactly, but recognition. His name was Eli Boone. She'd known him before, back when she had another name and another place, before her village was burned, before the soldiers. He had been a translator for the traders, half Lakota, half white. He'd moved between worlds like a man who owed nothing to either. And he'd watched her once with the same eyes he now brought to the ranch. "Well, I'll be," he said, grinning. "Didn't think I'd find you out here, Grey Girl." She said nothing, didn't blink. The rancher stepped from the barn, shovel in hand. "Something you need?" he asked, voice low. Eli didn't look at him. "Just passing through," he said, though his horse was still. "Heard a wild girl from the auctions ended up with a patch of land. Figured I'd see it with my own eyes." She stepped between them. "You saw enough." He laughed, slow and sharp. "You still got fight, I like that." The rancher took one step forward, shovel lowering slightly, but the weight behind it clear. "She's not yours to talk to," he said. Eli's eyes narrowed. Funny thing, that. Property lines get blurry out here, especially with land that used to be, let's say, unclaimed. "She's not land," the rancher said. "She's not yours either." For a moment, no one moved. Then the crow came, the same one or another just like it, landing on the fence post between them. It cawed once, sharp and echoing. Eli tipped his hat. "Reckon I'll be back. Got business in these hills. Lot of folks claiming what don't belong." He turned his horse and rode off, slow enough to leave his words behind like barbs. That night, they didn't eat. She sat by the barn fire, hands buried in her coat sleeves. He stood by the fence, pipe unlit. "He's dangerous," she said finally. "I know. He sells land, tricks the old ones, pays with whiskey and bullets, I figured." She looked at him. "He'll come back." He nodded. "Then we wait." In the days that followed, the ranch changed. Not in structure, but in air. He showed her the rifles, taught her how to oil them, how to check the sight. She knew already, but let him teach. They took turns watching the fence lines. She rode east, he rode west. They left signs for each other in the trees, broken twigs, stones in patterns. She taught him that, old Lakota ways. She found his carving knife beside the bedroll one night. The pine figure he'd been shaping now looked like a hawk. She placed it near her own things. A storm brewed, not in the sky, but between breaths. Then came the morning the barn door was found open. Not broken, just unlatched. Inside, the feed was scattered, one of the saddles gone. He looked at her. She didn't need to explain. Eli had been there, testing, reminding. That night he loaded the rifle. She packed a small pouch with herbs, a blade, and a smooth stone. Neither said goodbye. But when they stood side by side at the edge of the porch, watching the horizon burn red in the dusk, it was clear. They were no longer just healing. They were preparing to fight for the quiet they'd found, and behind them the crow called again. Once, then waited. The wind came back the day he returned. It howled down the hills like it carried names. Names of those who once stood here, of bones buried without stones, of treaties burned before ink could dry. The kind of wind that didn't just pass through, it stayed. Eli rode in with two others, strangers, but cut from the same cloth, mouths full of coin, hands full of steel. They didn't hide their rifles, didn't need to. The rancher was chopping wood when they appeared at the edge of the pasture. He set the axe down slow, not because he feared them, but because this land had seen enough sudden movements. She stepped out of the barn, braid loose over her shoulder, coat open, her eyes locked on Eli. And for a moment, she didn't see the men, just the boy he used to be. "You left your own for gold," she said, voice clear, then came back for what we had left. Eli grinned like a wound. I came back for what's mine. This land isn't yours." He shrugged. "You weren't either." But that didn't stop the selling. The rancher stepped forward, rifle across his chest. "You've made your point. You can ride on now." One of the men, broad-shouldered, red-faced, stepped off his horse, hand grazing the butt of his gun. "Ain't looking for talk. Word is she's hiding land claims. Old tribal marks buried under cabins like this." Grey Star didn't flinch. She pulled from her coat a small leather pouch, worn, soft as breath. From it, she drew a folded piece of hide. Symbols etched in ink, long faded but still visible. A map. Not of boundaries, of stories. Sacred trails, burial paths. Water remembered by the earth, but not by men. "My mother sewed this into my dress," she said. "The day we ran. It's not yours." Eli dismounted, walked slow, steps crunching the brittle ground. "You could have come with me once," I offered. "Back then, you spit at my feet." "I was 14, she said. "You sold my uncle for whiskey." The words landed heavy. The wind paused. Eli looked at the rancher. "You gonna let her speak like that? She's not mine to silence." Eli's hand went for his rifle. The rancher stepped in front of her. No hesitation. "You'll die before you touch her," he said. Not loud, not dramatic. Just true. The red-faced man pulled his gun. She moved faster. The knife left her hand in a blink, bone handle, sharpened edge, and found his thigh. He screamed, dropped. The rancher fired once, into the dirt, near Eli's boots, enough to stop hearts. Eli stared at him, eyes narrowed. "You willing to die for her?" The rancher's hands didn't shake. "I already did. The day I let my wife drown without me." Silence. Even the horses held their breath. Eli mounted again, teeth clenched. "This ain't over." She stepped forward now, standing at the rancher's side. "It is if you don't come back." Eli spat, then rode off, limping behind his pride. The others followed, bleeding, bruised. When the dust cleared, the land exhaled. She turned to him. "Why'd you say that about your wife?" He looked at her, face raw. "Because I froze. That river, it wasn't even deep. But I couldn't move, couldn't save her." She didn't speak. He stared at the blood on the dirt. "Today I didn't freeze." "No," she said. "You didn't." They stood that way a long time, the sun dipping low, the sky bleeding orange. He reached for her hand, not to hold it, just to touch. She let him. Inside, the house was quiet, warm. He lit both candles again. This time, she stayed. And in the barn, the crow returned, perched high in the beams, watching, like it knew something had changed. Something finally healed enough to be called whole. The days that followed moved slower, like the land itself had settled its breath. The morning light didn't rush in. It stretched golden and soft through the warped glass of the kitchen window. She sat at the table, shelling beans into a tin bowl, the quiet scrape of pods opening like a rhythm she'd always known. He passed behind her, brushing her shoulder gently, not by accident. They no longer avoided each other's gaze. He repaired the back porch, not because it needed it, but because she'd once paused there to watch the wind run through the wheat. He cleared a path from the barn to the creek, not straight, curved like the way she walked through the world, always watching, always careful. She placed the pine carving on the windowsill. The hawk-eyed shape now watched over them, wings tucked but ready. The crow stayed near, not caged but present. It flew off at dawn, returned before dusk. Each time she left bits of bread on the fence. He did too, though he pretended not to. They spoke more now, not long conversations, just sentences that held weight. "There's a warmth in the soil again," she said one morning. He looked up from the fence post he was sanding. "You think it's time?" She nodded. Corn doesn't wait for certainty. They planted together, side by side. Her fingers moved with memory. His followed slower but steady. They didn't mark the rows with stakes, just left stones, round and smooth, collected from the river she'd shown him. One evening, she told him the story of her name. "Wichapi Hota," she said softly, as they sat beneath the cottonwood near the barn. "It means Grey Star. My mother said I was born when the sky was not dark and not light, a star caught in between." He watched her as she spoke, eyes deep with something he hadn't dared name until then. "And that's how you live," he said, between the old and the now. She turned to him. And you? What do you live between? He didn't speak for a while. Then, with a voice rough from quiet, between what I lost and what I never thought I'd find again. That night, she didn't return to the barn. She stayed in the house, slept in the room he'd cleared months before, once full of dust and broken shelves. Now there were new curtains, a clean quilt, her boots by the door. He passed her in the hallway before dawn. She didn't look away. At breakfast, he placed her bowl before her, hand lingering for a second longer. They still didn't speak of love, but everything in them spoke it. And yet something stirred in her, not doubt, not regret, but a call. That evening, as the sun dropped low behind the pines, she stood near the edge of the field. Her hand rested on the stone pouch, still holding the map of sacred paths. The hills called her, not loudly, just enough. He came to her side. "You thinking of leaving?" he asked. She didn't answer. "I'd understand," he said. "I know." The wind moved through the wheat. The crows circled once overhead, then settled on the fence post. She turned to him. "Would you come with me?" He looked at the ranch, the porch, the fields they'd planted, then back at her. "This land made me less alone," he said. "But you made me alive again." She reached for his hand, held it this time fully. "I'm not asking you to leave it behind, just to walk beside me when I return, to the old trails, to the graves, to the rivers that still speak our names." He nodded once. Not a promise, a beginning. And as night fell, they stood there. A woman once sold for being too wild, and a man who'd lived half dead, now rooted not to land, but to each other. And above them, the first star blinked awake. Not bright. Not dark, grey. They left before dawn. No fanfare, no words heavy with ceremony. Just a morning sky stretched pale over the hills and the soft hush of boots on dewed earth. She carried the pouch across her chest. He wore his old coat, patched now where thorns had torn it. On the porch the crow waited, watching. She looked back once at the porch where they had first shared bread, at the fence he had mended with hands that now trembled only from love, not fear. At the house that once stood like a shell and now breathed like something living. They had planted more than corn. Inside the barn, she had left a stone circle, 7 smooth river rocks laid around a single feather. Not a ritual, just a memory made visible. He'd left the hawk carving on the windowsill, its wings angled just so, facing the eastern wind. A woman from the nearby township would arrive weeks later, answering a letter he'd written and left with the postman. She'd been widowed by the same fever that took her youngest. He'd written simply, "Land here needs hands. But more than that, it needs quiet hearts. You'll find both." When she arrived, she would find the house open, firewood stacked, a loaf of bread covered with a cloth, 2 pairs of worn boots by the door. Outside, the wheat would be tall. But now as they rode west, following no trail but the shape of the stars and the lean of the river, he asked her gently, "Will you know when we've arrived?" She didn't answer. Instead, she raised her face to the wind and listened. Not for direction, but for memory. For voices that only spoke to those who'd learned to wait. They passed no towns, slept near creeks, and beneath trees that still remembered her grandmother's voice. He began to understand the language of silence the way she'd once learned to endure it. Some nights, she would walk away from the fire, alone. He never followed. She always returned. And one morning, near a bend in the river shaped like a resting horse, she stopped. "This is it," she said. He looked around, saw nothing but rocks and tall grass, a hawk circling far above. But he dismounted, tied the reins, and walked beside her. She knelt in the grass, ran her hand over the earth. "She was buried here," she said, "my mother." She sang as